The Time Traveller's Wife, Stephen Moffat's TV adaptation of the 2003 novel, reaches halfway through its 2022 series with this, the third episode. We're going to discuss this episode, so we're going to discuss loving out of sync, realistic time travel, trying to change or fix other people, adaptations trying to change or to fix things from their novels, how characters are realised at different ages, tensions of adolescence, questions of authorship, and much more. This was a big characterisation-heavy episode. And I'm joined by my friends Ingiga and Oliver, both from England. Oliver being a fellow reader of the Time Traveller's Wife novel like me, and Ingiga not having read the novel. This isn't a spoiler-free impressions or anything. We'll discuss the actual events of episode 3, but we won't discuss events from the show, film, or novel beyond the stuff in this episode. And this episode, of course, contains some pretty sensitive and raw stuff, so the discussion will talk about that as well. Getting into it now, what did you guys think of this episode? How did it measure up against the first two episodes to you? Did you like this episode less, or did you like this episode more than the first two?
Yeah. So, it was less comfortable than the other two. By a long way. The first two are very whimsical.
Yes.
Having fun with the time travel. And this one even sort of strips out the time travel storytelling. It's all linear. Well, it's linear from one person's perspective, with a little bit of jumping around. But it feels very consciously less fun than the first two.
What did you think, Gig?
I felt this one, it wasn't quite as tight all around as, say, episode 1 was. But in terms of the emotional storyline with the relationship between Clare and Henry, that was probably at its clearest here. So I would say it probably wasn't my favourite of the 3 episodes, but I thought it was mostly quite solid.
Yeah, it was my favourite. It was definitely less writerly and tight than episode 1, but just digging much deeper into Clare and these two characters, I really, really enjoyed that. And I liked that it moved away from the whimsy a bit, and however it handled stuff, it was going a bit deeper into these ideas and this story. And it just felt so much like, I think it was you, Oliver, in our first discussion saying how it's like this is doing all the time travel and emotional drama of Moffat's other stuff like Doctor Who, but it's stripped out all the adventure story stuff. It's just a drama, now. It's just a story about characters. And this episode really felt like just an actual drama about actual humans without much of the frippery, so to speak. And I really liked that, yeah. Okay, where to start? Not at the end, I guess.
Well, I think we might, if we're going to start at the start, like the jump scare of old Clare at the beginning was, I don't think I'll forget that for quite a while.
Yeah, this is, the makeup on old Henry, I know people were poking fun at, and I thought, well, yeah, it's a little bit stagey, but, it's not that bad, I thought. Old Clare, I don't think was executed fantastically, but I mean the actors are the ones who have to sell it at the end of the day, not the makeup people, I guess.
I'm just completely resigned to the time periods looking kind of funky with regards to changing their appearances, because they clearly don't have some like amazing ability to magic people, so I'm resigned to it at this point.
It's fun that I guess like Doctor Who, if you've got Doctor Who brain, you're used to buying into actors who are way too old to be playing the part that they're playing younger versions of the characters. You just sort of accept that that Colin Baker doesn't look anything like he did years ago. There's something theatrical about the whole thing. You just have to buy.
Yeah,
I think the old lady makeup is better than the 16-year-old Clare. What, ponytails?
That's. Yeah, if we're going to talk about the different age realizations, I want to talk about the different Clares. So in Moffat's similar work, like on Doctor Who, where we have The Girl in the Fireplace, that story where we have a child actress for Renette, and then we have a famous adult actress for Renette that does most of the heavy lifting in that episode. There's no middle Renette, is there? It's just child and adult?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then in the Matt Smith Doctor Who, for the character of Amelia, of course, we have a great actress playing Amelia 90% of the time, or more than that. But we have a child actress as well who gets pivotal scenes for sure, but is mostly just in Matt Smith's first episode. And like her scenes are very, very iconic and very, very important. But I wouldn't say she gets loads of like emotional heavy lifting to do, would you say?
No, like she's mostly there to play innocent, I guess, in that episode.
Yeah. And so in Time Traveler's Wife, I think our youngest Claire is pretty much the same. Like she's having to actually act for sure. Like she's having to sell specific beats and reactions, and she's, you know, doing a good job of it with Theo James as Henry. But it's still just kind of selling this as the child version of Claire. And then, of course, we have Rose Leslie does adult Claire and 16-year-old Claire. But I really liked that we got an actress in the middle. This 11-year-old actress, Caitlin Shorey, playing 11-year-old Claire. I really liked her performance, and I really liked that we got someone in the middle to kind of chart that middle stage, because that's one Moffat didn't do when he did a similar storyline on Doctor Who. He didn't have like the tween version of these characters. And I think that's such a ripe time, because this is when it's the age when they're starting to understand more and question more, and they've still got that naivete that they can be kind of hoodwinked quite easily in some ways, but they're getting critical and cynical enough to push in other ways. So I think it's such a ripe age to explore like that. And I really liked how they did that. I loved how that actress was selling that scene where she's adding stuff up, trying to think, I think I am married to Henry. I think this all adds up. I really think I am. And so she kind of pushes that. She's intelligent enough and shrewd enough at this age to kind of push that. But she's still so young that Henry can knock it back just by flat out lying to her. And so I really liked all the scenes with that actress and that version of Claire. I thought it's such an interesting age to do this kind of stuff with, that it's not just the whimsy of, oh, I met you as a child. It's the actual development of, this is when you're, actually aging and changing who you are as a person. So it's really interesting to chart that course with the character there. How did you guys find that Claire in those scenes?
The moment 11-year-old Claire appeared, like that was when we started to see the Claire we know, from from Rose Leslie's performance actually starting to appear. I think up to that point, sort of 6-year-old Claire was just kind of, child Claire, child actress, whatever. But I guess like immediately there was more of an infusion of inquisitiveness, personality, sassiness, kind of like impudence. I thought those scenes were really cool. Yeah, I'm glad they cast her. Glad they included it.
Oliver, I think you've mentioned somewhere that it reminds you of characters in some of Moffat's Doctor Who Christmas specials, which also featured some characters the Doctor would see at different ages throughout their lives. Can you speak to that?
It reminds me of the middle version of Kazran in A Christmas Carol, or my favourite, which is the slightly older Grant in The Return of Dr. Mysterio, because you've got this motif of going back to the child version and impacting a child version of a character, but those stories make it a lasting impact that sort of recurs through their life. And in the same way that Kazran's, you get more of the adult character coming through, they get more cynical, and you can actually see that development happening rather than just cutting 20 years into the future.
Exactly. Yeah. It's when it's just the child character, it's like you're just kind of planting a flag and saying the time traveler affects the child, and we'll see that as the adult. But when you do like the middle Kazran in the Doctor Who 2010 Christmas special, like you're saying, or we're doing like the middle tween Claire here, you get to actually see the anxieties of, these issues of the time traveler interacting with the child, rubbing up against them as they age. Yeah, I really like that they did that. I think it kind of sells the whole story in a way, because we actually see her wrestling with it here. It's not just, oh, Henry is this magical man. It's like a fairy tale for me, like when she's a child. And it's not just the you fucked me up when she's an adult. It's the kind of meeting of the two in the middle. I really, really liked that. I read a bunch of interviews with the actress because I was really interested in how the three Claires managed all this. And in some, she talked about she did meet with Rose Leslie to kind of iron out how the character was working, which I think is really cool. But yeah, so I really liked what was done with that Claire this episode.
There's a sense of agency too, I think, where the the youngest versions of the character, like you say, they get a flag planted in them going, I've been impacted, right? They're more passive characters in the story. And then when we meet the adult versions, they're more active. But getting those in-between stages means you get that whole dynamic of her basically having figured it out, and being shut down anyway. You're seeing the full adult Rose Leslie version coming through.
It reminds me of, I don't know if you've seen or you had friends when you were kids, like when a child has kind of worked out Santa isn't real. Like intellectually they've completely worked this out, but they're still naive and young enough and they kind of want to believe in magic enough. They still kind of can be convinced he is real, at least for a while. That kind of in-between age where your brain is somewhere, but you know your heart is still pulled back a bit. The novel does this a bit more because it has a lot more of that religion discussion between Claire and Henry, which this episode touched on a teeny bit, but the book has like a whole section on them like philosophically debating about whether God exists and stuff like that, as I recall. It's just such an interesting age to explore where they've got the smarts, but they've still got the naive kind of heart. So it's a really interesting mix. And I loved that we saw her confront her dad, like with the hunting. It's you're actually seeing the effect all this Henry stuff is having on her. And we get that link back to the first episode with she already understands the blood appearing kind of thing. Yeah, that was all really good.
And you know, the scene with her when Henry first tells her that he's not married to her in the future, and she's actually completely heartbroken by that. I think it's something we hadn't quite seen before up till now in the show. It was like just how Henry's attempt to kind of do the right thing ends up, you know, putting him in a really difficult position because, you know, he's in a position where, you know, the more that she meets him, the more that she really wants him to be, you know, this magical fantasy, you know, husband, you know, who's perfect for her and who's devoted to her and everything. So it's so genuinely sad when he has to tell her that. And it's like, oh no. And of course the whole episode is charting the journey of him eventually being pushed to reveal the truth almost inadvertently.
I love how the actress didn't overplay her disappointment there. Just how she looked kind of crestfallen and you could see what her face was doing, and then just saying that I'm fine, and it's not too melodramatic. I really like that. I think it really sold. You could kind of see she's internalized so much of this Henry stuff, and she's built up all this stuff in her head that he's able to dash away for now, for a couple of years at least, by his lie there. Yeah, really well played.
That scene is very much an adult shutting down a kid with a crush, right?
Exactly.
Like that's a thing that happens quite a lot.
Very much.
And so it's interesting that it's played exactly like that. And the more complicated layer is that she's right.
Yeah.
That's the thing, because like everything about how he's behaved is actually, you know, giving her the hints that no, actually in the future they are nice. She's correctly figured that out. So it's just that. So it's even worse for him to be like having to like shut her down, and like it's worse for her because like everything seemed so like set up perfectly that suddenly she's just getting like told no.
And the episode's very concerned with that question of what does I think Claire says, what does a decent man do in this situation? What do you do if you're confronted by a young version of your future wife? And asked whether you're going to end up together? Obviously, you have to lie. It's not a good thing to do, but it's the best thing to do in that circumstance. It's very much how it's framed, right?
Yeah. I think what I like with how all that is handled is it really, when we see 16-year-old Claire, however she's realised, come onto the scene, and she's very 16-y, as Henry says. She's in that kind of stage of you can tell she's lustful for Henry, and she's kind of enjoying that she can kind of have some effect on him now that, you know, she's that age that he seems to view the interactions they're having as having a tinge that they didn't when she was a different actress, I suppose. I like that it doesn't feel as facile or superficial or, oh, teenagers, you know, are like this, teenage girls are like this, because those scenes with 11-year-old Claire, we can really chart how her mind goes from there to wanting to kind of exert over him like she does there. Henry has that line, what is it about his being naked, that it starts being wrong when you start enjoying it, or something like that?
It's really interesting that the moment she's played by the adult actress, she's suddenly full agency. She's in control of the situation. And it spins on the power balance shifts on that time jump. The moment she's 16 now, played by an adult actress, she's suddenly in control. And she has her own wants that she's now gunning for. It reinterprets their whole relationship around that age jump, which is a little odd with the playing 16.
Yeah, I'm of two minds about that. Gig, what did you think of using Rose Leslie as the 16-year-old Claire?
Well, when it first happened, I was like, oh, they're doing this, are they? But at the same time, in the context of the wider show, it's obvious why they did it. And because in the context of like the story this episode has and just how visually they're plotting out the relationship between Henry and Claire across the whole show, like I think you can see why they felt it was really important to have the main actress for Claire play like these scenes and this sequence.
Yeah.
And also just like the material that they were giving her in this episode, I think they felt that entrusting Rose Leslie with it was like, in terms of the spirit of the show going through, that it was probably the best thing to do. And honestly, I wasn't like fussed about it really, because at the end of the day, I mean, it's television, it's fiction, it's made up. You know, of course people are playing different ages. Looking real is not the most important thing with drama. You know, it's telling the story in a way that is emotionally intelligible, I think is the key there. Like, the people watching the show, like, they can get that it's fiction, it's pretend. You know, as long as they can follow the story, that's what counts.
I think Rose Leslie did a good job embodying the character as 16 in those first scenes, especially the kind of more comedic ones where she's doing that kind of shaky flirtatiousness that a teenager might do. And even her facial expressions are so much more kind of pointed and kind of exaggerated in the way a teenager does as well. So I think Rose Leslie did a good job performing the character as 16 there. But I think in the more dramatic scenes, she kind of disappears a little more into just like acting like normally, which is, you know, fine because she's a very strong actress and it suits the material. But I only think, while I think this was the best choice they could have made, if it was a different actor, not necessarily the 11-year-old actor or whatever, like another actor again to play the teen one, I think it would have helped emphasize the age of Claire in these interactions. I think sometimes, even when the actress is doing her best to embody the different age, just the actual physical sense of, you know, this is an adult playing this kind of dulls some of the scenes, I thought. But I think it was the best choice they could have made, yeah.
Yeah, I agree she felt more like adult Claire in some bits. Like, maybe more so than maybe should have.
Well, there's very much two sides to it, right? In that you want her to feel young, because this is a story about Claire's childhood. You want her to feel young, but you also want her to, feel like she's the full person. 16-year-old is, you know, you think more or less like an adult at 16. You're not fully a child. And so, and especially in the logic of this show, you want it to be clear that this is Claire now. This is a version of Claire we recognize. So it makes sense from that point of view. And also the nature of this story, I think you want your lead adult actress to be guiding the character.
Yeah.
At this chapter of her story. So it de-emphasizes how young the character is at this point, which both works in convincing you that this is something that happened to Claire, the person Claire who we now know. But it also takes the age out of it slightly.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Like when Henry reveals, you know, I am your husband, when he's blurting that out, like I think that plays in a different way, maybe a more straightforwardly romantic way to some maybe than it would have played if we had an actual teenage actress there, where I think you would have felt more the weirdness or the timey-wiminess of it a bit more. But yeah, ultimately I think, yeah, this was the best choice to make.
Even that first scene with her hiding the clothes, given that it's played by an adult version of Claire who we've already seen be romantic and sexual.
Yeah.
You don't notice so much that she's literally 16.
Especially
this is an odd thing to be happening.
In episode 1, we even had, the off-putting little speech by Rose Leslie's Claire about how she'd been fantasizing about him for so long and how he'd been so good in not taking her up on her flirtations or something like that. And so for that to be literally the same actor as the one that's so young here that Henry is pushing back and going, whoa, I don't want any of this nudity games or flirtation with you. You're still a child, cut it out. It kind of dulls, I think, what could have been done with a teenage actor. But yeah, I think, there are pros and cons for either side.
Just speaking of teenagers, small thing. I thought the other teenage girls that Claire was hanging out with at the party, they were played in the most hammy way. Really kind of strange. Like every line they were saying was like, oh, you want to dip your toe in the pool. Oh, you're not being deviant. Oh, who you fancy. Oh, wow, he looks good. Wow. It was like some musical theatre type thing.
The show is becoming a musical apparently later this year. I don't know if that's still happening this year. Yeah.
The book or what do you mean?
The novel. I think it actually is. It's through Warner's who have the rights to adaptations, I believe. Because I know the novelist on Twitter was saying a while ago she's got nothing to do with the musical. She didn't even know it was happening at first, but it is. So that'll be something to witness one day.
I can see it.
Yeah.
By the same logic that Groundhog Day makes quite a good musical, just because the story looping of it lends itself to the way music works.
And on stage, with theatre, the ages of the actual actors matter even less. So a lot of stuff could work like that. But in terms of the dialogue of the other teens, it's funny. There's some stuff where you kind of feel like, the novelist, who is a woman, like Moffat says, quite similar to Claire in some ways, he thinks. The novelist would have the very authorial perspective on some of these, events or life experiences. And then Moffat, he's going to have the more male perspective. He'll be able to understand being an asshole more maybe, and he'll have more insight into the Henry stuff. It's funny which bits actually come closely from the novel, where I think sometimes they get read as probably coming from Moffat instead. I thought...
Are there any examples?
Well, yes. The end of the episode where we get this isn't about the rape itself or the assault itself from
Jason.
It's the event where these ladies all write on him. So Claire just rings up all the women at like 11 p.m. or whatever and says, I've got Jason tied up. Do you want to come, do like an anti-sexual assault PSA on him? That is from the book, and I saw some people kind of critiquing that as what a clumsy, kind of male, a PSA type writing of something like that. And I remember finding that quite clunky in the novel. So that's where that originates from. Something I wish he'd tweaked, to be honest, because I find the actual handling of the sexual assault, a lot of that rings really true to life. I'll say that. But the PSA thing, I mean, to my experience and people I know, does not. Like, I have a hard time really calling up and them all just writing on him, and that didn't really work for me. But that is from the novel.
I think it's very unreal, but it feels like a big enough statement. In a way, I'm glad that Moffat didn't change it, or didn't change it much, because I guess fundamentally this isn't his story. He's adapting it. And as much as...
To use the episode's dialogue, you don't want him to mansplain the whole life of the story.
Exactly. And as much as it is unreal, and as you say, it's as unreal in the book. It feels like a sort of heightened, slightly metaphorical statement rather than, a thing that literally happened. I think I can buy into it as much with the generally heightened nature of the rest of the show.
Do you remember in the book, the next day when Claire goes to school, all the other girls actually applaud her? Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad they left that out.
Yeah.
Everyone clapping.
Hey, we've got next episode.
It's not like a full-on ridiculous thing of like everyone slow clapping as Claire walks into school in the book or anything. It starts with people like oohing and ahhing over her and giving her messages of support and stuff like that throughout the day. But the actual literal applause only comes in the locker room when her peers all see her wounds, and then her peers start clapping and laughing and cheering after one of Claire's peers goes, well, to everyone staring at the wounds. But yeah, it does speak to how like there are some really believable and realistic, honest notes to the assault and the reaction to it. But there are also some of those really heightened, fictive feeling, to me at least, notes as well. And that stood out for me in the episode a lot because some of the lines, some of Moffat's lines were just so straight to the heart, honest and accurate. Like psychologically, they felt so encompassing. So many painfully believable notes with the assault itself. Claire had some lines. If I had told him the truth, it would make it even more true, and I did not want it to be. So, that's not an unreal thing. That's such a very believable psychological thing. Henry never knew the truth, so when I was with Henry, it stopped being true. I could make it not true when he was there. That's so true. That's such a believable way to characterize all that. Which is why the unreality of the PSA in the woods type thing stood out to me a bit. But I really appreciated how they charted Claire's characterization with the assaults, especially because, and this is something that, wouldn't be obvious to show-only viewers. In the book, we don't get it explicated that she was raped, like old Claire explains in the episode. In the book, it's, well, some people would take it as ambiguous and some people wouldn't. It's presented like what the younger Claire said to Henry. And I saw the novelist has been tweeting about this lately because people are asking her, well, did Moffat change, this, or did I misread this? What was going on? And so the novelist on Twitter has been saying stuff like, my intention was that Claire had been raped by Jason and that older Henry understood this, but she never explicitly told him. I also intended for the reader to be able to decide that she had not been if they wanted to decide that. Some things are very difficult to say out loud. I read it the way Moffat read it, but I thought it worked for him to actually make that explicit in the show. First of all, Gig, what do you think of that? That how hearing how it was played differently in the book?
Interesting. Like, I think I'm pleased that Moffat went as far as to make it explicit, because, partly because if he didn't, you know what TV viewers are like, there'd be all kinds of, what's this, what happened there, what was this? And I think the detail of making it explicit that Claire kind of lied to Henry, and kind of that she was doing sort of a thing to kind of make it sort of not be true as long as she was with Henry, kind of sort of distort the truth in that way and kind of process her trauma in that way. I thought that was really interesting. So yeah, I think it was a good choice to kind of go explicit with that.
That reminds me, I loved the text message thing. Such a absolutely believable teenage thing that I think some people, especially older people, and people very not in any experience in the realm of being a teenage girl that's been assaulted would understand. Why would you text thanks for the good night, to someone that's just assaulted you? But yeah, that so tragically believable, especially because you can see how easily that could be, read, and how he could manipulate using that, and you can see all the ways that kind of thing could evolve out. I was so worried that Henry was gonna humor it or entertain it and ask what's he talking about. I was on the edge of my seat going, please don't. I know you're an arsehole in some regards, but don't actually be repugnant, to humor what Jason was saying. So yeah, I appreciate that they didn't go down that way.
Yeah, being unfamiliar with the story, there was a brief awful moment when I wondered if there was going to be a twist, and it turned out the whole thing was Claire just trying to manipulate Henry to get him to admit that they're married in the future. I was like, oh no. So I was pleasantly surprised with how it turned out.
Yeah.
I think there's something really deft with the structure here. Even though it's not got all the time travel shenanigans the other episodes have had, the way that information's passed to the audience, stuff like the fact that we're pretty confident that, based off what we've seen, that it was a rape, and Claire denies it flatly to Henry. And in that moment, we, the audience, go, okay, we're in Henry's shoes. And then you smash to the future version of Claire, who just says it outright. In that moment that you don't get in the book of just, yeah, this is it. This is just the facts here. And the way you've got that, the use of the framing device there as a sort of objective truth to push back against this whole sort of ambiguous tug of war, the thing Jason's trying to do, it does feel relevant to the whole conversation about ambiguity of sexual violence in relationships and people being able to deny things based off circumstantial evidence that's very believable if you squint from a distance and weren't there. And that thing that you mentioned, where for a sort of gut-wrenching moment you think that the episode is going to reveal that Jason is right? It pushes it just far enough that you sort of think Henry might give in and believe him. And the way that information is handled, just sort of structurally how the story works, I think there's something really clever about making sure the audience's perspective, even when it's teetering on, for half a moment, you might think the episode's about to undermine everything Claire said, and then it pulls it back. And the fact that you've got adult Claire injecting that objectiveness into it, I think that's a really intelligent way of telling this story, to be honest.
It's also quite a clever way of leading into the reveal from Henry that he's married to Claire, because it's because that he knows Claire that well that he knows without a doubt that Jason is bullshitting, is wrong. And the fact that it's the strength of that bond that ends up kind of pushing him to kind of spill the truth. It's a good cap on the episode.
I think it knits together the stuff with the younger Claire as well, because the episode keeps exploring her agency or her lack of agency, or like the knowledge that Henry holds over her. So it works so well to have older Claire like confide in us, the audience, knowledge that she's holding over him, agency she is reclaiming in this situation surrounding a sexual assault, which makes all the sense in the world, that the character would reclaim some control over the situation or control over the memory or the story of what's happened there. So yeah, I think that all felt really true and worked really well within the episode. But yeah, like you're bringing up there, the because I'm a fucking husband, and then shortly after Henry saying I love you to Claire for, I believe, the first time from her perspective. Really interesting moment. Also not how it went down in the novel, but I really liked it. Yeah. Yeah,
he says it almost like a reflex, but like, so did you say it's different from how it went down in the novel?
That didn't happen in the novel. Well,
right.
Him saying because I'm a fucking husband didn't happen. But the most of that stuff, that scene did happen. Yeah.
Because like he says I love you almost so casually to her, and like just he's about to disappear. He just says I love you and he's gone. But like for when you think about it from her perspective, that's so seismic, because like, almost as seismic as the marriage thing. The fact that he just says it to her straight out, and it's like a confession almost. I mean, it's been kind of obvious, but long before that point, that he is devoted to her. Yeah. Obviously, she says earlier that when he'll kill for you, that's how you know. But it's a really small moment that's also really huge.
Yeah, and Rose Leslie's face just quivering with processing. It's kind of the it's like the evolution of the child to the adult. You can see in her face. It's like quivering with like this childlike, confusion or like amazement at what she's learned, and the adult embracing or accepting what she's just learned. It's like the Santa, realization moment that Henry lied to her, but the thing she wanted to be true is true, but it's coming at, such this emotionally heightened moment. Just such a big scene to play.
On the topic of Claire's agency, just one little thing, I guess my mini favourite bit of the episode is when Henry sees the burn on Claire and he flips out, and Claire
yes.
and he's about to say, Claire, okay, Claire, go away, you're not part of this, it's my turn, I'm taking charge. And she immediately shuts him down, saying, don't you dare make this about how angry you are. My question, was any of that in the book?
Not really. Not the note I think you're talking about. This is kind of the stuff I mean when I talk about people misattributing stuff between Niffenegger and Moffat, as similar as they are in so many ways. I'll read out how it goes down in the book. So Claire's revealed that, she's been hurt and that she went on a date with this other guy to Henry. And so she's describing it. And then in Henry's internal narration, it says, I'm getting nervous. Claire never told me any of this, just that she once went on a really horrible date with some guy named Jason, who was a football player. Claire has fallen silent again. Claire, did he rape you? No. He just said I wasn't good enough. He said, no, he didn't rape me. He just hurt me. He made me. She can't say it. I wait. Claire unbuttons her coat and removes it. She peels her shirt off and I see that her back is covered with bruises. They are dark and purple against her white skin. Claire turns and there is a cigarette burn on her right breast, blistered and ugly. I asked her once what that scar was and she wouldn't say. I'm going to kill this guy. I'm going to cripple him. Claire sits before me, shoulders back, gooseflesh, waiting. I hand her her shirt and she puts it on. All right, I tell her quietly. Where do I find this guy? I'll drive you, she says. So no, Henry doesn't have that outburst that Moffat included.
I think the reason I ask is because that specific note of Claire shutting down the sort of, I guess, the male revenge fantasy, kind of like I'm the man, I will now avenge my woman or whatever, regardless of what she wants. Because that shutting that down feels like Moffat's been cooking that for 11 years. Because you can see that kind of his other stuff leading up to that, and the way of just kind of taking down the whole masculine macho revenge fantasy that depersonalizes the woman who's actually the subject, the one who's had the trauma.
It's good man goes to war. It's hellbent.
Yeah.
And also Face the Raven as well.
Yes. What I must share now is from that same Stephen Moffat Hollywood Reporter interview podcast. I used some clips of in our episode 2 discussion where in this situation, the Hollywood Reporter asks him pretty straight up how his writing may be different now compared to his work decades ago, including on Doctor Who's The Girl in the Fireplace. And his answers are really interesting, but more importantly, they're really pertinent to what you were just saying.
As you basically went through all of those years on Doctor Who and all of those variations and permutations on themes that you got to do, did that change your perspective on what you liked about the genre? And maybe do you think it kind of filtered through in a different way when you went back and revisited the book and attempted to adapt it?
I'm not sure it did. I mean, as you know, I occasionally riffed again on it with River Song and all that, and the Doctor keeping his spare TARDIS key inside a copy of The Time Traveller's Wife, and all sorts of little sly references. I loved them. I mean, if anything changed, it wasn't the time travel thing. I mean, I'm confident in writing time travel, he said boldly. But if anything, I'm 2 decades more married than I was. And the theme of Time Traveler's Wife is love over time. That's what it's about. Love over time, but not necessarily in that order, is what the book is. It's love over time. And so I've thought more about what it is to love someone, what it is to be loved, and the fact that painfully love and loss are inextricably linked. Love means loss. Sorry to cheer up your day. Love entails loss. Love is nothing without loss. But, when you lose your heart, you don't get it back, or it comes back broken. That's it. That's it. Love and loss. And what I think she does so brilliantly in the book, and what I'm trying to do in the show, is say, there is drama in a happy marriage. Normally we inject drama into marriage by, one of them has an affair or gets divorced or they hate each other or one of them turns out to be a reptile from space, or is that just me? You know, you normally inject drama that way. She didn't do that. She just injects drama by a device that reminds you this is not forever. In fact, it's not for very long. Happy ever after is a terrible lie. It's happy for a while. That's what you get. You are dancing on the edge of a cliff and you will lose your footing. But the music's still going, so what are you going to do?
Yeah, and so Moffat speaks more to his views on mortality there and how they play out in the show in that section of that Hollywood Reporter podcast. It's really good stuff, honestly. I recommend going and listening to the whole Moffat interview if you're fascinated by these clips I've been playing. It's a great little discussion. But I just want to play another clip from further on into it where Moffat addresses directly whether he'd do Doctor Who differently now, with all this life experience and time travel experience and marriage experience rather, and love experience since his older work on the show, like on The Girl in the Fireplace. And I think his answer links back to our first episode discussion, Oliver, when you were talking about liking the show as being like the heart and the themes of Moffat's Doctor Who, but with the structure and the adventure format taken out, leaving just the character stuff, basically. He kind of speaks to that here.
Touching back on Doctor Who, after having spent so long in this world and in this version of time travel, do you think that you would write Doctor Who differently if you had a chance to return to that franchise?
Not really. Doctor Who is Doctor Who. It's a different beast entirely. They both happen to involve time travel, and you can make them resemble each other in different ways. But Doctor Who is a highly sugared adventure yarn for kids, but adults who like that sort of thing. That's what it is. I love it to bits, but it's a romp. It's a mad, it's adventure. It's not the same thing as The Time Traveler's Wife. I always think, the characters in Doctor Who, the companions and so on, they're mad people. They're mad. They're all mad. Because if that guy offered, or that woman these days, offered me a ride in the TARDIS, I'd run a mile. Because the Doctor will stand there and tell you, I'll show you wonders and majestic things and you will be transported. No, you won't. I'll get stuck down a tunnel and there'll be a giant frog monster trying to eat my leg. That's what's going to happen, Doctor. I've seen that rubbish show. Now leave me alone. Because I think it's a different... Doctor Who is very, very much its own beast. I think that's why Doctor Who spends a lot of its time riffing on other shows. Time Traveler's Wife is only one of a number of movies and books and things that Doctor Who just takes a go at, because it's such a distinct flavor, Doctor Who. It can just say, let's do Die Hard this week, and it'll be different because the most ridiculous hero in modern fiction is taking over. But yeah, I don't think it would change it, no.
I guess speaking to that note of how Doctor Who's format is kind of inherently riffing on other shows, if not to those Moffat quotes directly, how do you think they speak at least to how the actual big reveal was done in this episode in terms of Henry's reveal to 16-year-old Clare that he's her husband, and whether that links in or doesn't to how these sort of reveals were structured in his earlier writing like this?
There's something very interesting about having the I love you immediately after the reveal that he's her husband. The fact that, because those aren't actually the same reveal, right? They're very connected, but the fact that they are going to end up together isn't the same thing as the emotional knowledge that Clare is loved, and specifically that Clare is loved by Henry. And it's interesting to get them both at the same time, because for her, this is a confirmation of the fact that she's suspected all along that they're going to end up together. But what that means in this specific context emotionally feels very different. It feels more like a sort of everything's going to be okay, I guess. Hey, I'm here, even as he disappears.
That's the thing. There's a difference. There's a difference between like facts about the future and an actual direct emotional link with someone.
And so it's interesting that at the age of 16, he has at the same time confirmed that they're going to live together and get married, but also that their relationship is romantic. And even if he doesn't, if he's the perfect gentleman, as I think Claire says, and doesn't do anything until they meet properly, he is confirmed emotionally to her that their relationship is romantic, which the episode doesn't go into, but that's not going to be easy for the next 10 years of her life.
Something I found really bewildering in the book, when you're reading a book and something happens and you go, oh wow, I must have skipped a page, let me go and find that, and there's no page you skipped, it's just something's happening now, and it feels like maybe you would have thought it would have been explained, but it wasn't, and it's just happening. In the book, Henry kisses 16-year-old Claire a couple of times in these kind of this kind of area of the story. In the show, he takes her for ice cream instead, which was a change I really liked. Yeah, I don't know if you remember that, Oliver, but I remember even Control effing Kiss through the ebook going, wait, when did this originate? Why is this happening now? Yeah. So I liked how the episode started much more paternalistically with Henry with 16-year-old Claire. And then, that even gave it kind of a more dramatic bent to the reveal when he says, I love you at the end. It's more of a shift. Whereas if they'd been more familiar earlier, it would have been less of a shift.
Going to get ice cream is a lovely parallel with my favourite episode of Doctor Who.
Oh, yes.
Good Night, Bad Night.
Yeah.
The Matt Smith minisode.
Yes, anyone who likes these kind of time travel effect on children and adults and paternalistic magic-y figures, yeah, those are worth searching out on YouTube. Those little Doctor Who minisodes.
I partly think Moffat really delights in writing stuff like the ice cream and paternal Henry, like shutting down the kind of the flirtations of 16-year-old Claire, just because it's an opportunity to write shenanigans, I guess, and kind of embarrassments and kind of frustrations and kind of backs and forths and like a interplay. Like it's just fun, and I think it's obviously it's a rich opportunity for him to write comedy, but also like in terms of reassessing the story, like for today, and doing a new version of it, like changes like that are just a sensible thing to do.
And it's still like a power fantasy for Henry or like male viewers inserting into him, because it's still like, look at this. This young teenager lusting over me. Look at the how I can exert to control this situation, in a peaceful, responsible way. I have the power to do that because I have the power to not do that as well. I could do it in a more exploitative way. So I think it's not even like we're doing this in a much more progressive way. Totally. It's also just there still is an element of kind of dominance to his ability to set the tone for the situation there, which is something he'll start to lose as we see with our Claire at the end of the episode, who meets our wavy-haired Henry, where she is the one setting the tone for the interactions more than. So yeah, the power dynamics are really interesting there.
That Henry's parentalness and power in that relationship is slightly oddly, I think, reinforced by older Claire's insistence that he's really, really decent.
Yeah.
She keeps going, that's he did what any really good man would have done.
That rang a little weirdly to me. It had a tinge of the there's some Moffat Doctor Who stories like it, where it's like everyone's bigging up like he never said his name or whatever, like everyone's bigging up like the hero character in a kind of melodramatic what's the word, hagiographic kind of way. I don't know if I was reading those wrong, but yeah, I found those a bit weird, like how she's like exalting Henry when she's old. Yeah.
I think the read in the episode feels very much like an authentic celebration of how really, really decent Henry is. But my brain twigged the whole episode that this feels like a sort of symbolic sequel to Good Man Goes to War, the Doctor Who episode. And Good Man Goes to War, right in the title, makes a point out of good man, the idea of being a good man, being being a front, being an idea that our lead character doesn't actually live up to. And there's not actually any of that in this episode. I wonder if it's something the show's going to go into slightly more. It touches on it right in the last line, which we'll probably get around to, but I won't talk about.
She does mention that, like, there's few things that do more harm than the lives of decent men. So I guess in that sense, the idea of a decent man is maybe not entirely uncritically presented, but also it's not, I mean, it's glib, it's one line, isn't it?
It's not concerned that much with Henry's morality. Henry's not even linear in this story. Henry's not the main character. He's often the perspective character. But Claire's the one we're actually following through the story. He's sort of presented not entirely uncritically, but as a pretty straightforward good person, which is sort of an open question, which is then answered by the last line. Which is he's a decent person because Claire made him that.
Yeah, that's I think the interesting note here. Episode 1 especially looked at this, that the good man, the like heroic Henry we're all talking about is the one that the show, like very much Moffat in interviews and the show itself is framing as like a creation of Claire. Like this this good man Henry isn't our contemporary wavy-haired Henry. This is the Henry that apparently is shaped by Claire. And then, of course, it's the big loopy thing of, but then that imprints onto young Claire, who blah, blah, blah. That's how it goes. But it's interesting. So he's kind of like a fantasy that's been made real by her influencing him to become who he wants to live up to being for her. It's very interesting.
She says Jason is her first piece, right?
The sculpture?
Of her sculpture, yes.
Art is revenge, yeah.
Yeah, and the implication of the line right afterwards that when she met Henry, he was an asshole, is that he's another one of her sculptures.
Very well said. Very well said, yeah.
Right? It reminds me of all Clara's lines about the Doctor being a hobby, right?
Yeah, in one of the quotes where Moffat says very much what you're saying, he even the expression he uses is Claire's thinking, all right, this one is the best of this. All right, this one is the best I got. Let me roll up my sleeves and rebuild him into someone else entirely. The version of Henry that Claire meets in her childhood is the one she designs in her adulthood, the rebuilt, remodeled Henry 2, the better version. Rolling up sleeves, rebuilding, remodeling, yeah, all these terms. It's like art that she's doing. She's making him like a sculpture. She's literally reshaping him. It's so fascinating that this is kind of his view on marriage. I'm so interested in that because it's such a competing view. You know, you see people say, don't get with someone on the basis of the person you think they could be or that you could turn them into, which is...
I can fix him.
Mistake. Most of us, probably going to make at some point is thinking, oh, this person is a person they're not, or not yet at least, or I could turn them into that person, or they're going to develop into that person at some point. But this, and I guess this is the benefit of being a romance and being fiction and being, a construct you can make work like this, is that it's kind of successful. Is it only successful through time travel, being able to rebuild someone in this way? Because it's a loop is how they make each other perfect for each other, isn't it? Henry becomes a perfect Henry, but it's inspired by young Claire being imprinted on by the perfect Henry. So it's all like this. Can this sort of idea only work in, fiction like this? Or I don't know. I don't think the show is trying to necessarily make a statement on how relationships should work so much as it's just exploring, the ideas of love and relationships in general. But it's interesting to think about.
It's interesting that the predetermination of it undermines the predetermination usually associated with love. They're not perfect for each other. That's the clever conceit of the show, is that they're two people who are literally destined to be together and they're not perfect for each other at all. Because no two people are, right? No one's an actual natural soulmate match with somebody else. Every relationship is imperfect. and even this one that is literally destined to be together is imperfect. And so you make do with that and you work on it. It's the idea of love as work, right? You put in the effort and you're there for each other and you work hard to help make yourself better for the other person. That's how it works, isn't it?
I guess there's that distinction with like compromise, compatibility, through compromise compared to like a kind of idealization. He could be this or she could be that, or I can make them into this, is different from, I'm going to let some stuff go, or I'm going to change myself a bit, to accommodate them, and they're going to do the same for me, which, relationships is work, very, very, very much. And of course, I think this loops back to that clip that we listened to earlier of Moffat talking about his experience with marriage as being the main thing that's changed or informed his writing over the years, is probably a much keener sense on this sort of thing. Yeah.
It's interesting if we can do a bit of an overview of his writing of time travel relationships. It's interesting how much this is a sort of synthesis of... So, Renee and Amy Pond are people who the Doctor impacts as a child. River Song is, and Clara are both the other way around. They are women who impact the Doctor as in inverted commas, child. They both imprint on a younger version of the Doctor as future, more grown-up versions of themselves. And then this is a synthesis. This is a bootstrap loop where that he imprints on her, she imprints on him, going around in a circle. It's this neat idea that the determinism and agency aren't incompatible. The contradiction is that everything about each of them is made by the other person, but that's in turn the person who made them was made by them. It's this whole idea of don't worry too much about what part of your soul is actually yours and what part is made by somebody else, because it's all made by you and somebody else. Every action you take is the result of your relationship with others, and every relationship with others is the result of your actions. In real life, all relationships are a feedback loop. This just uses time travel to make it literal.
Yeah. There's a passage in the novel I was looking over today, which kind of speaks to the kind of no start and no end, like the infinite kind of loop of their effect on each other is part of the whole appeal to Claire. I thought was interesting. It's Claire saying, I love him, he's my life, I've been waiting for him my whole life, and now he's here. With Henry, I can see everything laid out like a map, past and future, everything at once, like an angel. I can reach into him and touch time. He loves me, we're married because we're part of each other. It's happened already, all at once. Which is really interesting. And that's, I think in his other shows, like Doctor and River Song, I think part of the appeal is kind of the infinite. There's a kind of comfort to this has already happened and this will happen. This extends beyond my sense of self in the now, which I guess is kind of a metaphor, for marriage. Even if it's linear, it's something bigger than yourself. It's something extending beyond yourself. But it's interesting that she's kind of enraptured by the is it maybe the lack of stakes in a way? Like this is confirmed, that this man loves me before and after and now.
I think being able to be at peace with the past, the present, and the future, in the knowledge that all of this is going to play out a certain way and that everything will be fine. I think that's kind of a fantasy in itself. I think various writers have looked at that idea, being able to look at all of time spread out like a city, like Alan Moore has done that, even I think Moffat has done it at points as well. I think just the idea of just being able to be at peace with your life, I think is the sort of the wishful element of that.
I've just read Stories of Your Life, which is the short story that the film Arrival's based on. And that goes into great depth on the idea of knowing the future and knowing the bad things in the future doesn't have to define how you live your life now. and you're not going to be able to avoid all the bad things in your future, whether you know them or not, right? We can't avoid all the bad things that are going to happen to us. Everyone bleeds one day. Oh no, I'm quoting the show already. But it's that whole idea of, I guess in a way, the time travel confirming that they're going to be together is a way of skipping to the relationshipy part of their relationship. We don't need to bother with all the will they, won't they. They will. It's a show that goes, they will. What happens next?
Yeah, I love that's like Moffat has said. It's like the middle bit, a relationship working basically, or not having. It's not about the end or about a divorce or about a death. It's about just love. Just them actually loving each other and knowing they love each other. Yeah. I also think on this timey-wimey note we're touching on, there was an interview where an interviewer asked him to compare the time travel in his show to like time travel epics like the X-Men Days of Future Past and Terminator and all that kind of stuff, and asking why use it for romance? Why does it work to use it for romance? And I really like what Moffat said. He said, "We crave the places we can't go. That's how we're hardwired. The shore we cannot reach is the most alluring. That's the past, isn't it? We can't go back there. We can remember it, but you literally can't go back home again. Without wanting to depress you, you are not going to get that far into the future. It's fairly limited. You are going slowly and not very far. So time travel allows you that. Time is such a factor in love and romance. You talk about the time of your life. You talk about the limited time. You talk about remembering. Time is a factor when you are looking forward to meeting someone or seeing them again. Time is a factor when you are missing them and how long ago it was. Time is a player. And in this particular very unique version of time travel, you are not allowed to change anything, which I think is the most realistic version of time travel ever written. It's all nonsense, of course. What do you mean you can change it? Shut up, Doctor Who." End quote.
I think it was last episode, there's something so interesting about, it's not that your actions, it's not that it's physically impossible for you to change the past. It's not like, there's less emphasis placed on the idea that if you try and stop something happening, you're going to get struck by lightning or whatever, and more emphasis placed on the fact that you will decide to let the past be as it is, right? It's grounded in character rather than it's determinism grounded in character. This was always how it was going to turn out because you will always choose it, not for any other reason.
Yeah.
Young Henry, absolutely determined not to run off to the other side of the room. And then, of course, he has to, because there's something he cares about more than sitting still and proving his point.
Yeah.
There's something so neat about that.
I liked with the car speeding sequence in the episode that it wasn't like a fixed points in time, timey-wimey, wonky kind of reason why so-and-so can or can't work. It was more him kind of admonishing the adolescence of what Claire was doing there, that you were only thinking of yourself and the rules as they apply to you, whether they're time travel rules or, road rules or whatever else. You could have done this. You could have done that. It's all well and good that, the time means you're going to live or whatever, but you could have killed people. There's all sorts of stuff that could have happened that's, not precluded by knowing what you know. So I liked that it wasn't so much a here are the rules of the time travel sequence so much as you're such a 16-year-old right now. You're literally speeding and you're not thinking about the consequences and you're not thinking about other people. So I liked how that was done.
Yeah, it's important that the quality of life is not guaranteed, even if she is alive. Even if she's with Henry, actually having a good life is another matter altogether. There's a difference between simply being alive and actually having a life that's worth living.
I love that sequence because we know it's playing off the fact that they're not gonna get in a car crash and die, because we know that, and Claire knows that. But as Henry says, any number of things could have happened. Other people could have died. I think you spoke last week about the title sequences.
Yeah.
Being a little bit different each time. And how that's a motif that feels like it's building to something. This felt like a little bit of a payoff to that, because now it's running, the whole episode is sort of running on from one of them. It's all about Claire waiting, which is what the motif is. It's her waiting with the clothes.
Yeah, and we got a spin on the book cover image this time. It wasn't the exact same. It was a lonelier image with how it was... Was it just her... It was just her feet.
Just her
this
feet,
time.
yeah, no clothes.
It wasn't with the box.
Because the sequence in question, it was showing like the first time she met him, wasn't it? Because we got that whole recap of their first meeting with young Claire.
I love how the show is folding over the same event. The end of the episode did the same thing, kind of reframing or just adding, perspective to the first episode with contemporary Claire and Henry. I really love this. I love how it's a really interesting way to tell a story. I also think it feels more like how we actually think. We're always getting lost in our memories, and we're always, thinking more on things, and our minds are looping around on things. And it's just a great way to tell the story. I really like how we're folding back with new angles too. It's not like this is like, footage already from episode 1. We're like seeing stuff in new ways, or we're getting stuff added on and things like that. I really, really like that.
I thought the ending was maybe a little bit too far, and when old Claire outright starts quoting things she already said to him as young Claire. You're young. He was younger than I've ever seen him. How younger than I've ever seen him.
That's fair.
I think there's a risk that the show isn't going to binge very well with this level of repetition, because it's just like slamming your face with things you just watched.
They could do a you ever see our Arrested Development season 4, which originally was this, in my opinion, beautifully structurally experimental piece that was playing so much with how you can push how an episode of TV works and how a joke can be structured. And then a couple of years later, the showrunner recut it to be standard television, told chronologically as possible. And it was the most boring thing with the most voiceover I've ever heard in a show before. It would be amusing to cut up Time Traveler's Wife in just make it flow as sequentially as you can, using as much old Claire voiceover to map everything together as you can.
God.
It's so televisual. I love because each episode has its own interesting structure, but the macro structure of the whole series, the first two feel like they follow a certain logic. It's first date, second date, right?
Yeah.
And then this one's totally different. It's a totally different perspective. And the way the first one focuses on their meeting, the second one's more about trauma. And this one's about Claire's point of view, very specifically following her, through her waiting. But from the macro perspective of how a TV show works, it's so interesting because they have to come in this order. The episodes make sense in the order they're in, but there's nothing particularly chronological about them. In fact, this is all set before either of the other two episodes from her point of view. It's sort of a flashback episode. But the way that works in the structure of a TV show, it's really making advantage of the medium. I've not seen the film, but I can only imagine it loses out by not having this TV shape to it.
There are a bunch of Moffat quotes about the film I'm saving because I want to do a discussion just on the film, maybe a week or 2 weeks after the finale, because it's very interesting to compare. But yeah, that's not relevant right now. Just returning to the whole Jason storyline, what did you guys think specifically of how it was like staged and filmed? Of the sequence where Claire like disrobes a little to show all the wounds on her in like the headlights of the car. How did that staging work for you? Because I thought it was a little bit
sensationalistic.
It
felt like it was playing it a little too loudly.
It's playing it too loud is exactly what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's because from a character point of view, you can see it. Claire's she emphasizes everything she says, and she literally gets in the headlights of the car to make a point of it. And it makes sense from a character point of view, and it gives an action to the scene, right? It adds a physical dimension to both the performances and a visual dimension that really emphasizes the drama of it, but it also, again, feels a bit unreal because of it. Yeah. There's like a shot, there's like a very composed shot of the two of them, like perfectly in the middle, and there's, the lens flare going on, and it's kind of like romantically like
framed, and it just felt a little weird to me. But yeah,
I got the sense that there was kind of a subtext with it, which is like throughout this whole episode, Claire is like part of the horror for Claire is the fact that she's not only been assaulted by this douche, but like she hasn't been able to like be close with Henry, who she longs for so much, and when she kind of showily goes in front of the headlights and kind of disrobes herself. I mean, that's the first time she's shown her body to Henry, isn't it? In a sense, so there's almost like even though it's like she's revealing this horrible thing that happened to her, like I got the sense that there was also a sense of like she wants to. Like a desire for intimacy with Henry, and almost to like and she kind of showing herself in that way was kind of her trying to, I don't know, like bridge that gap in a sense, almost like not quite in the same way she was also by hiding his clothes, but also in that sense of like see me as an adult, like as a woman, as a person, something like that.
It's not the time to patronize her; it's the time to level with her. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
I think there's a really quite ugly read on the episode that I certainly think the adaptation could have done more to de-emphasize. I remember it from the book, I think, but it gets played up a little bit here, which I didn't like, which is the sort of soft implication that Claire going to the party is almost infidelity. It feels like the staging of that scene cutting back and forth between the two of them feels like emphasizing Henry's, oh no, he's been abandoned here.
Yeah, that was a bit weird.
She can do that. She can not show up for a weird man who turns up for it. That's fully okay. But then the staging, I think you can read, and I do remember this from the book, is you can read almost blame on Claire the whole situation, which I don't think is intentional, but I really think should have been played down a bit more, especially some of the dialogue. Older Claire.
I see what you mean.
When she's at the party and she's looking over the guys and stuff, and how you can see how clearly none of them kind of really interest her because they're not Henry, but also the fact that because she's been kind of shut down by Henry so much, she feels like she needs to I might as well try, something else, someone else. Like that desire to almost get away, get some sort of distance from Henry, who keeps rebuffing her. It's sort of like, it's kind of tragic in a sense, because you can see kind of what's motivating her to try and like to go to this party, maybe try and do something else. But like, it's, and then it gets really awkward because, she ends up suffering this horrendous trauma because she looked away from Henry like 5 minutes. It's like, it's almost, and it's another case of kind of the circumstances of the story being contrived in such a way so as to like kind of put Claire and Henry together in that sense, and like and make it kind of inescapable that Claire and Henry are for each other. So it's like I didn't feel like Claire was like being blamed exactly, but we didn't need those shots of Henry looking like dejected. He should be happy that she left him food and clothes. Don't whinge about the fact she went to a party. Like she's a 16-year-old girl.
It's if he sees himself as like a paternalistic like caretaker or teacher of her, with helping her with the homework and stuff, a teenager going out to a party is like a normal and healthy part of their social development and everything, so it would be him kind of contradicting his, I'm the presidential, fatherly, Henry, to impose a like a, she can't cheat on me by going out to a party. This makes me sulky, she's not allowed to do that.
Shot at,
yeah.
And it's one of those things. It's there feels like in Moffat's writing, there's always this slightly undeconstructed layer of jealousy to the relationships that doesn't get as much attention, say, as the revenge stuff does. Where you've got stuff like the 12's line about robbing a bank, robbing a whole bank. How's that for a date? Where it's never really the focus of the drama, but the jealousy is something inherent to the character. They're all very jealous lovers. And here you get the sense that, grown up presidential Henry would never tell her off, but he's not happy that she's gone out somewhere without him. And that's odd and uncomfortable. And if he is in this role as a parental figure, he should be celebratory that she's doing all right without him. I think that it also would have, there's not room before it in the series. And if I remember correctly, it doesn't happen in the book. But I think it really would have helped to show Claire in a healthy relationship with someone else for a bit. She just gives it a go. She knows it's not going to work out forever, and that can be its own little story or whatever. But she spends some time with somebody else and is happy for a while. And I think that would have been a much needed counterpoint to the sort of soulmate infidelity angle that is a little uncomfortable here. Yeah.
Yeah, and the brainwashing of Claire by older Henry, basically.
He has romantic experience outside of Claire, so he's had like some actualization like that. She doesn't get that.
And the series knows that it's not a healthy position that she's in, right? There's no indication that, you know, when she says, I formed my libido around you.
Yeah.
Like, that's not healthy. We know that's not healthy. The show knows that's not thumbs up a great time for everyone involved, but it's the situation she's in, and damn it if she's not going to make this man into the man she wants him to be. But it does sometimes play slightly jarring notes. I think there's something... Henry's role in this episode as not a non-character, but a de-emphasized character. The lack of context we get for him, the fact that he's an agent, for sure, but sort of an abstract agent, I think is really interesting. And especially his role in giving her the pen feels symbolic of what the episode's doing at large, which is that he's in this story, in this episode in particular, to facilitate her agency. That's the point of him here.
Yeah, she's growing up in this episode. She's growing up, and he's kind of helping her do that.
He gives her a pen. That's what he does. That's his role in her story, is he hands her a tool, right? It's so much her story, and it's all about her decisions, and I think that moment's a neat little microcosm of that all he actually does in resolving the story is happen to remember that she needs a pen. I think that's quite neat. I like that.
It's a little thing, but I really, really loved the phone call between the two Henrys, and using your other self as an alibi, the one that's actually living in that period in a contemporary way. I just thought that was such a neat idea and a fun little conversation.
I also like that while this is a very strict version of time travel, there's more rules than there are in Doctor Who. It also gets away with playing around with it a little bit. Like the Q&A recording from last episode.
Yeah.
There are really strict rules, but you can lean on them a bit. You can play around with them. You can call a young version of yourself to get an alibi while you do a murder.
Yeah, I'm glad there's no like Blinovich effect shit where never the twain shall meet. That would just make it so much less fun if the two Henrys couldn't interact. Just one little thing. We mentioned the God discussion earlier, and just how there's one little quick exchange between Claire and Henry about like, do you believe in God? And the thing about characters in stories and in fiction is that they do in fact exist in a universe with a god, and that god is the author or authors, because they are dictating the order of events. So, and what I really liked about Henry's line, he said, when Claire asked him, does he believe in God? He says, I don't like his work. And that's kind of the allusion to the idea that as their characters in the story, it is a work. It is essentially a design that has been kind of imposed upon them. So, I guess I don't really have anything in particular to go with that.
No,
but it's just a note that, in the sense that they have essentially a god of a kind has done this to Claire and Henry, because that's what's happened. Like, the author has put them in this position. So that's kind of, I guess, a reminder that what this is. It's not really a comment on nature, because it doesn't happen in nature. This can only happen because it is a construct.
Yeah.
Doctor Who's got the stabilizers on a little bit in regards to violence, and it does lots of big heightened sci-fi violence and big ideas like blowing up a cyber fleet or whatever. But there's something very different about the violence here, and different to how it works in Sherlock or Dracula, where it feels sort of, again, fantasy, a little bit sanitized maybe. Where here, this is violence. That line of Claire's about the man of your dreams will kill for you or whatever struck slightly odd to me, because it's not the mode that Moffat writes in. Usually that kind of violence is different somehow. It's fantastical in a way. Where here it's just violence. It's just beating up a guy who you've tied to a tree.
Although I should note that Moffat makes that whole sequence of kidnapping him very kind of funny, because Henry is constantly quipping in a way, just doing that kind of quippy murderer sort of thing. Like, well, yeah, I'm gonna kill you. Don't make it worse, stuff like that. It's very entertaining in that way. So it's kind of back to that Moffat mode in a sense. But Moffat always has a way of kind of, I guess, sort of balancing his usual kind of witty, irreverent style with whatever else he might be doing.
And it doesn't feel like there's a straightforward denunciation of the violence. Like, you don't get the impression that the episode's saying it's wrong for them to kidnap and beat up and think about killing this guy. But Claire decides, A, they're not going to kill him, and B, she is going to, make something out of him. She's going to use him to make a point, to I guess, be constructive. To take her pain and unite people with it. But that resolution doesn't feel quite the same as saying that the violence was unjustified or wrong. It feels like the episode's quite comfortable with the idea of kidnapping a rapist and threatening to kill him.
Yeah, I'm glad Henry didn't lecture Claire about, oh no, it's wrong to kill this guy for doing all this. Oh, it's really bad. I mean, obviously, it would be out of character of Henry to do that, because we know what he's like. But also, it was just refreshing in general.
Since this is the third episode, it's worth pointing out something Moffat has been saying about the first 3 episodes in different interviews, which is, he says, it takes quite a long time to lay down the rules of time travel in this story and how it absolutely works. It takes us probably 3 episodes to nail down how the time travel really, really works and make sure the audience is confident with it. And he's comparing the structure to the book and to the film when he's talking about that. But yeah, he says 3 episodes to nail down the time travel and how that all operates. And we've had the 3 episodes now. So it'll be very interesting to see where he takes us now. He thinks the audience is comfortable with how everything works. Yeah, and that concludes our discussion of this 3rd episode. Thank you, listeners, for listening. Please do share your thoughts on the episode, the show in general, Moffat's writing in general, our discussion of the episode, any of that. Please feel free to share them. We always love to see them. Thanks again, and let's look forward to the next episode.